have to speak next to the amendment. Mr. Poilievre, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Today I'm going to do something a little bit unusual. I'm going to spend almost all of my time quoting Liberals. Instead of offering my opinion, I'll offer theirs. And let me start by quoting the testimony that gave rise to this entire matter. And I quote, "I experienced a consistent and sustained effort by many people within the government to seek to politically interfere in the exercise of prosecutorial discretion in my role as the Attorney General of Canada in an inappropriate effort to secure a deferred prosecution agreement with SNC-Lavalin." Those are the words from the woman to whom the Prime Minister of Canada entrusted the role of the Crown's top law officer, the Attorney General herself. Next, I will quote the person that the Prime Minister thought was most qualified to handle Indigenous relations, healthcare, and finally the Treasury Board, which is one of the central agencies of the Government of Canada. She wrote, "I felt there was evidence of an attempt to politically interfere with the justice system in its work on the criminal trial that had been described by some as the most important and serious prosecution of corporate corruption in modern Canadian history." End quote. Now, I note that when she speaks of this important and serious prosecution of corporate corruption, she is referring to the allegations of over $100 million of fraud and bribery leveled against SNC-Lavalin. Before I go further, I want to address the racist notion that these kinds of crimes have no victims, that this is just the way things are done in certain countries. Canada is party to international treaties against corruption, the purpose of which is to put an end to wealthy Western countries impoverishing developing nations through systematic and parasitical corruption. It is not just the way things are in African countries, and we should never allow our companies to think that they can get off while bribing those countries' leaders and robbing those people of their money. And that is exactly what SNC-Lavalin is accused of. It stands accused of bribing Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi with a whole series of gifts, including prostitutes for his son, in order, in return, to extract $100 million from among the poorest people in the world. So this is not a victimless crime. This is not just the way things are done over there. And we have a duty to hold our companies to a higher standard than that. No more winking, no more nudging, full criminal prosecution where evidence merits it. Now, the allegation is that the Prime Minister went to extraordinary lengths to avoid such prosecution. And let me just review those particular lengths. First of all, he jammed an amendment to the criminal code into an omnibus budget bill. Since when do we amend the criminal code in a budget bill? Liberals on the Finance Committee, who discovered it late night as they were going through the 600-page document, were astonished. The chairman of the committee said he didn't think it belonged in a budget bill. That is a Liberal. As I said, I would be relying on the words of Liberals. The Liberal member for Hull-Elmer, Greg Fergus, said that he thought the amendment to the criminal code amounted to a slap on the wrist for large corporate criminals, that it would create a justice system where people were more punished for stealing $10 than for stealing $10 million. All that being said, the amendment became law. And after it did, the Prime Minister's office engaged in, again, what Liberals describe And I'm going to quote some words here. Some of them are verbs, some of them are nouns. Harassed, hounded, veiled threats, bullying, and more. These are the words that I'm taking from current members of the Liberal caucus. Up until recently, among the most senior ministers in the Prime Minister's government. If Liberals now say that the people who uttered these words have no credibility, well, they weren't saying that only 2 months ago when these same people were actually administering large departments with immense power. So I come back. What would motivate a prime minister to engage in this kind of activity? To amend the criminal code to help a company get off charges, to then engage in sustained and consistent interference, to harass, hound, issue veiled threats, and carry out bullying. What would be behind that move? Well, originally, we were told it was jobs. That if the company didn't get off the charges, that it would 9,000 jobs would disappear and the headquarters would move. Well, just days ago, the CEO of SNC-Lavalin said both of those claims are false. And let me show the discrepancy. The Attorney General says the Prime Minister twice claimed to her that the headquarters of SNC-Lavalin would leave if she did not immediately help shelve the charges against the company. Prime Minister has later denied making that comment. Unfortunately for him, he had repeated it at his press conference on March 8th, where he said, "We had heard representations from various sources, including the company itself, that this was an issue of deep concern to them and that the trial would potentially have consequences as dire as the company having to leave Canada altogether." He claims the company told him that. Well, Neil Bruce, the CEO, let me quote what the Toronto Star said in December. CEO Neil Bruce also insisted the company is committed to remaining headquartered in Montreal. We absolutely want to be based here in Quebec, here in Canada. BNN asked him, did you threaten to move your headquarters from Montreal? No. Never? No. Mr. Bruce, I don't know what people make up or why or what they have in their minds. So the Prime Minister said the company headquarters would be gone if the charges proceeded. And now we know from the company itself, from the statements by the CEO, I might add also from public filings showing the company has to stay in Montreal as part of a loan agreement, and from public press releases showing the headquarters is signed in for a 20-year lease in Montreal, and that headquarters has just recently been renovated to keep its employees in Montreal. We now know that the Prime Minister's claim that the headquarters and the company would leave Canada was patently false. So it wasn't about jobs, which raises two additional questions. One, if he wasn't protecting jobs, who was he protecting? And two, Mr. Chair, we're not just investigating whether the Prime Minister interfered in a criminal prosecution, but whether he and his team lied to the Attorney General about the prospect of the company headquarters leaving in order to manipulate the Attorney General into shelving the charges based on false information. These are questions that we need investigated. These are questions we never had an opportunity to investigate at the Justice Committee. Another question. Today, Canadian Press and CTV reported that effectively that Gerald Butts lied to the Justice Committee. He claimed that Jody Wilson-Raybould was moved out of her position as Attorney General because of a musical chairs phenomenon that resulted from Scott Bryson's resignation. Today, CTV and CP report that no, it wasn't because of that. It was because the Prime Minister didn't like her choice of judges. We need to find out which story the Prime Minister's office is sticking with on that question today. Now, our friends, the Prime Minister has said, enough has been said. We know everything we need to know. We need to know. Time to move on. Well, let me go back to quoting Liberals on that question. This is Jody Wilson-Raybould's letter to the chairman of the Justice Committee. She's writing here about the waiver that allowed her to appear before the committee. And she says of the waiver, that the OIC addresses only my time as Attorney General of Canada and therefore does nothing to release me from any restrictions that apply to communications while I served as Minister of Veterans Affairs and in relation to my resignation from that post or my presentation to Cabinet after I resigned. Why is that important? Because we know that in the period after she was removed as Attorney General, she witnessed something that was so egregious it required she resign from Cabinet altogether. Now, do we know why she resigned? Well, she can't say because of the aforementioned restrictions contained in the Prime Minister's limited waiver. So let me illustrate the problems that limitation caused at the Justice Committee. Deputy Conservative Leader Lisa Raitt, for clarity, can you tell us what you discussed with the Prime Minister at your meetings in Vancouver on February 11th? Jody Wilson-Raybould, I cannot. Can you tell us what was discussed with the Cabinet on February 19th? I cannot. Can you tell us why you've resigned from Cabinet? I cannot. These are examples of things that she has not been allowed to speak about. Now, some Liberals have suggested that she had unlimited license to speak and say anything she wanted because of parliamentary privilege. This is merely a distraction. If that were really the position of the Prime Minister, he would have said so instead of issuing a limited waiver at the outset, and furthermore, he wouldn't have limited the time frame of that waiver. It is merely a procedural distraction. As the old saying goes, complexity is the last refuge of the scoundrel. So let me further quote Liberals on this matter. I'm now going to quote current Liberal Member of Parliament and former Treasury Board President, who says, and I quote, on the matter of whether there is more to discuss, and I'm quoting, there's much more to the story that needs to be told. She goes on, there's been an attempt to shut down the story, end quote. Again, that is a Liberal. This is not an allegation from a Conservative or a New Democrat. This is a present sitting member of the Liberal caucus, someone to whom the Prime Minister had recently entrusted 3 very senior cabinet positions. So you don't need to take our word for it. You can just listen to what Liberals themselves are saying. And keeping with Liberals' comments on this matter, Judy Sgro, Liberal MP, has implored all of you to vote in favor of allowing this study to go ahead. She has said that she believes Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott should, and I quote, put up or shut up. Those were her words. So we could let them do that. We could let them put up their testimony before us in this committee. If Liberals, backbenchers, and Liberal ministers who are going out and telling the media that they just want Wilson-Raybould and Philpott to just say what they got to say, well, let's invite them here to say it. Now, Ms. Sgro was not obviously just speaking for herself because the Prime Minister's democracy minister Karina Gould, went out and said that they should put it on the record. Everything else they have to say, put it on the record. We can do that right here at the Ethics Committee. So if these Liberals, including a current Liberal cabinet minister, are being honest and sincere, and they really want to give Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott the ability to put up or shut up, or put it on the record, as they've said in their own words, then Liberal members should honor the wishes of Ms. Sgro and Ms. Gould and vote in favor of letting them do that. So the decision for Liberals representing the Prime Minister on the committee today is this. Are you going to put up or cover up? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Poilievre. Next up, we have